maybe from today, so Professor Jikari is the kind of main figure in this lecture. So before he begins his main lecture, so let me briefly introduce myself and give the floor to him. So I'm Professor Sung-Wook Ho at Law School. I'm in charge of public law, including IT and AI nowadays. So I'm very honored and pleased to have this chance to co-teach this class with the famous Professor Jikari. So I'm also very thankful to Professor Cha to let me have this wonderful chance. Maybe the first main part of this class this semester will be covered by the team of Jikari, so which includes many wonderful topics about AI ethics. Maybe I will teach the later part of the class, which will be composed of AI and privacy, and AI and healthcare, maybe AI and administrative decision making and judicial review, something like that. So I will follow up the class and prepare my lecture for the time being. So this is my brief introduction, and I will give the floor and mic to Professor Jikari. So let us welcome him with big applause.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you, Professor Cha, for the very kind opportunity for me to be here and also be affiliated with your university. That's really an honor. So thank you very much. Thank you also, Professor Hill, for the opportunity to do something together. The law part is very important. So, and I would also like to thank Jaewon Chang for the help that he has done until now. And also my assistant, Dennis Fetter, that is also helping on some of the organizational things. So if you don't mind, I'll start sharing my screen so that we can basically start the lecture. I think you should see that. So, well, welcome to the series of lectures on ethical implication of AI. As mentioned, my name is Roberto Jikari, and this lecture is coordinated also with Professor Heo Seong-wook, and the two assistants are Jaewon Chang and Dennis Fetter. Very excited to be able to do this lecture together with you. And this is an introductory lecture so that will give you the foundation of what is happening. This is a quote just to give you a kind of a brief understanding that we actually like AI. So artificial intelligence is a strong technology that has a potential for helping people, but as long as we are able to keep it beneficial. So basically not harming. So that's a quote from a famous colleague. So this is really the key question that we would like to address in this series of, actually more than a series of lectures, also a workshop, because you see the students that will work on that, they not only have to listen to lessons, but also do some practical work. So the question is, how do we know what are the benefits versus the risk of using an AI system? And I put it in quote, no, because obviously the situation where, for example, if you are a manager in a hospital and you need to make a decision when to use a particular AI system, you have to make a decision. So how you make a decision? Or you are a policymaker that need to decide whether certain AI system will be used in the country or not, and what limitation. Or you may be a lawyer and you want to assess if the use of AI is legal, and so forth and so forth. So what we will learn in this course, two parts. We learn basic principles. So basically learning the ethical implication of the use of AI. What are the consequences for society, for all of us as human beings? And this discussion and debate of ethical issues is an important part of our professional development. So beyond AI, so I think this is quite an important part for all of us. This is actually the basic principle. And I think what is unique in this series of lectures is that we apply this principle in practice. This is really the interesting part of this course, because students will learn how to assess a real AI systems in practice, identifying possible risks and what I call issues. And issues are, you'll see, there are different kinds. It could be technical issues, it could be ethical issues, it could even be legal issues. And the way we will work is that students need credit points, but also will work in small groups of 2, assessing real AI system in healthcare. So we choose healthcare as a domain. The course description is as follows. We have a series of live lectures like today, but also we have some set of pre-recorded video lectures covering a number of topics. What it means that when you have a pre-recorded lectures, you don't have to be necessarily attending at this time, because you can attend it and listen to the lecture anytime you want. And only when you have live that we are expecting you to be attending the lesson in the particular time. And I assume that all the lectures of Professor Seonwook will be live. So there will be a schedule that I show you. Some of the topics that are covered in the pre-recorded lectures are, a bit what is ethics in general and moral values, trust, which is a key factor when we talk about trust in AI, and things like fairness, bias, discrimination, transparency, privacy, safety, accountability, human in the loop, and specifically ethics in healthcare. So this is like a little bit of administrative stuff. Of course, it's all by Zoom. We're thankful for the technology. The live classes are Monday and Wednesday from 6 to 7:15 Korean time. Only the live classes. The one that we pre-recorded, you can attend it whatever you feel like. And the course started today and will finish on June 16, is 16 weeks. The language of the lecture is mainly English, at least my part for sure. Although I'm trying hard to learn Korean, but I'm far from being able to do any decent thing, maybe in 2 years' time, but not for the moment. Anyway, and we have a website. I'll show you afterwards. That's the link of the website. I'll show you in a minute so that you can see what is in the website. For doing that, I need to stop there and get on the website and then share again, because I didn't know how to do it better. Anyway, so this is the website. This is the website that you will see. Well, don't think I wrote this. This was written by native Korean. Anyway, but what is important is that you have the schedule here, and very important that you can see. You can see that every day there is an information. Like for example, here is live. So today you are expecting to be around. So that's my lecture. You can already download the content of the slides here. And if you have a recording, we can even put the video here. And then you'll see that in each of this lecture, you have assignments. So for example, 2 papers to read. And if you click here, you can download this paper and download this paper. Then the next lecture that I will do is also live, and there will be some information. But then whenever there's no live, these are already predefined lectures. So you can see you have the slides and the video. And then you have for each week some assignment. I'll talk about it, either be papers, or in this case, is a web tool that you are supposed to try because it will be important. So as you can see, this is quite a very interesting set of lectures with always assignments. There will be something here for practical work. And then at a certain point from here starts a lecture of my colleague, Professor Yeo-Seong Wook, and which are very interesting because there is a block of lessons that are related to law and healthcare. And then you can see who are the people. So then you can see, if you want to know who are the specific people that did some specific lecture, you can look here. And then there is some information already on the reports here, but I show you now in my presentation, but just in case, if you want to see, this is all here. Okay, so now I'm going back to my lecture. Which is supposed to be shared. So sorry that I need to do some little movement. Here we are. So that was the small introduction to the website, which is this one here. Now, what do we expect from the students that are working for credit points? Well, for all the others, we expect also motivation to be involved. But for the people that would like to take the credit points, you have to create teams of 2 students. So this is something that we will need to let also the teaching assistant maybe to arrange it. So basically, they can either choose themselves two students, or you can match them in case they don't find a partner. So it would be quite nice if we can maybe also with Dennis be interacting. So once you create a team of 2 students, then we have teams. And then this team each week, and that's why I show you the website, you should watch 2 video lectures of the week and read 2 papers per week. In one case, you also look at some papers. What is important, the reason why you're doing that, because there is a practical part, which is as a team can choose freely you can look in the internet, an AI product or a solution in healthcare that is real. So not an hypothetical, not a general one, but a specific product that is being sold or in use. Why that? Because then the whole idea of learning the principle is to apply them and assess this particular product that you have chosen to see if it's trustworthy. No, we will spend some time on the notion of trustworthy. So trust means I trust on something, it is worth to be trusted. And we will be based on a set of principles. I choose in a European perspective, but obviously it will be also very interesting to see the Korean counterpart. And it's called the Framework for Trustworthy AI. And then you use a process that we developed in the last 2.5 years for assessing system using trustworthy AI. The inspection is the name, is actually Creative Commons. And so I think you are probably among the first outside our, let's say, area that are using it in practical. So I think it would be very interesting. So what is the assignment for this week? So already, well, there is this lecture, so you can download the copy if you want. And then you see that in the website, you have 2 papers to read. The paper 1 is called Ethical and Societal Implication of Algorithm, Data, and Artificial Intelligence, a Roadmap for Research. It's from the Nuffield Foundation. Is a research center in UK. Extremely interesting paper, and we will use it extensively because it will introduce you concepts that are being used during the course, such as ethical issues, ethical tensions, trade-off, and stakeholders, and ecosystem, and a number of other things. So this is a very important paper to read. It's actually quite long, but it's actually quite easy to read, but you have to spend some time. So that's why for this week, that's important to have that. So if you have a question on this paper, we need to find a way to interact. And the second paper, which is also key, is from the so-called independent high-level expert group on artificial intelligence set by the European Commission. And they are the ethics guideline for trustworthy AI, which is the key framework that we're going to use. So we are using these two papers extensively from the very beginning. So, and you can download it from the website. I already give you the assignment for the week after, so that you at least are prepared. So the week after, there is my live lecture, which is a continuation of this one here. But here is actually interesting thing. You start watching 2 pre-recorded video lectures. Since the pre-recording was done previously, so don't bother about the dates or any administrative stuff. The important thing is to look at the content. So there will be a gentle introduction of principle of ethics in artificial intelligence done by me, and more specifically ethics in general done by a colleague called Dr. Manuel Goffi. So here is a gentle introduction. What are the issues of AI and ethics? And here a little bit, what is ethics? And you want to read this paper, which is a continuation of the paper, paper 2 on the high-level expert group. They did an assessment list. You see that this is quite useful for the assessment because it's like a checklist. And then they have a tool. So I spent some words on that. There's a web tool, is a beta that the European Commission has offered. You can actually start playing with that because you'll use it in the second half of the course. But I think it's important if you start playing with that. I give you some information. At least you have now at least the beginning of the things. So why that? Because we are expecting that you start reading, watching the video recording of lectures, because the main goal is to do assignments. One would be a midterm report due in May 10. That will be between 3 to 5 pages. And then finally, you do a final report that will be total of 10 pages. Now you ask, what are we talking about here? Well, we are assessing a real case. So this midterm report is the following. So what are the requirements? The goal of this midterm report is to, as a team, select an AI system in healthcare. You can choose any product, any system in anything. Remember that our course is in English, so if you choose a system that is developed in any place, you should be able to describe it in English. So that's important. Other than that, you can, and then the idea is to start evaluating this system. Now, this will be done by teams of 2. You will be using this guideline for trustworthy AI. That's the first paper that you're going to read. You're going to use this Z-inspection process, which is also based on the first paper. And so you see some of the concepts you start putting into place. And in the midterm, you're going to basically follow this process. So the midterm report will basically have 4 elements. You create a team of students. So then you're going to have to define what you want to assess, so what the boundaries and the context. Then you're going to analyze so-called socio-technical scenario and identify ethical issues and tension. That's your milestone here. So basically is you look at the product, you go through some process. I explain all of this anyway. And the first output is, okay, we think that there are certain issues. Certain issues could be ethical issues and tension. Certain are technical. We seem to see some risk in certain technical area. Or we think there are some legal issues. That's why it's so important to have a colleague in law, because then we're not analyzing if it's legal, the system, but we can, list, legal issue or condition. This will be in the first report. And then you continue that by doing some other steps that I'm not going to tell you now because they're part of the process. But basically, you're going to eventually validate, verify some claims. A company say, we are ethical, we are safe, data are secure, we do not discriminate, we don't harm. These are claims. So how do you verify these claims? And now you build up evidence. What are the evidence facts that helps you to verify the claims? And then finally, you create a final list. So now this was a preliminary one with some recommendation, using also this web tool that I was mentioning. And you pretend to give recommendation to relevant so-called stakeholders. The inspection process in a nutshell is here. Just for admin, the report contributes to your grade, and every team member will receive the same grade. So it is 2 people, and they are, what we were thinking, because that's what we did in the past, that the report, we would like to have it as a Google Doc. We can create one Google Doc document per team. Then it's something that between Dennis and our other TA, we can agree. Normally we did it in Google Docs. And then basically is between 3 to 5 pages, including references. That's a very easy way for us to correct those Google Doc. We can still discuss internally. So what do you expect in this midterm report? Well, first of all, you're choosing a system. You describe what the system is, and then you describe where it is used. So it's in healthcare, it is used for radiology, it is used for predicting some diagnosis. You try to give some, is used in hospital or is sold in general to doctors. And then you're gonna use so-called social technical scenario. We're going to talk today a bit today, and you have a paper to read, which is a way to understand how this system works. And then you need to identify what are the issues. And basically, the idea is that by listening to lesson, using this web tool that you'll be using afterwards, you'll be able to produce your first requirement. So here is something more specific. When we start with the midterm, you basically have a choice to use a system, to choose a system. And then you start analyzing so-called social technical scenarios that are nicely described also in some of the papers that you will read. But basically, you have to collect all relevant resources that you find, mainly probably in the internet, and using this tool that is called social technical scenario for creating scenario views. So you try to understand what is the aim of this system. So you can say, well, this system has been designed, implemented, and sold for helping medical doctors to do a better prediction of certain disease. Or this tool, the aim of this tool is, and then you have, I'll tell you about the source. So you try to define what is the purpose of the system. Once you have done that, the next step is, but who is using it? So who are the actors? Actors are basically whoever has to do with the system. It could be the user, it could be the vendor, it could be the developer, it could be the person that gives the permission to use it. So you can list all the people that have something to do with this system, directly or indirectly. And then for each of these people, you start looking what are their expectations. For example, the vendor might have an expectation that they would like to sell or maybe help somebody to solve the problem. The end user maybe is a medical doctor that would like to use it because then his job is easier or he is more precise. For the person in the hospital that decided to use it, maybe the expectation would be to cut costs or to have a better system. So basically, each actor try to understand, or what the information you can gather, what could be the expectation, and then how they interact with each other. And especially with this system, because now all of a sudden you have a software, an intelligence software that is in between people and processes. So you not only have an interaction between people and the system, but also what kind of processes this AI system is used. For example, is this used by, I don't know, radiology, or in the radiology department where they have already other tools, and this is just one additional tool for making, for example, screening. And so then you try to understand the processes, and then, and this is also important, try to understand what kind of technology is being used. Now, depending on the team, if the team is composed of only technical people, this will be probably easy for the technical people. The ethical part will be difficult because there's no background. So you need to see, maybe the best would be to have teams where the two people in the team have slightly different backgrounds so that you can complement each other or something like that. And then also to see what is the context where the AI system is used. Is in the hospital, it's just used in a praxis, or it just simply sold and you have no idea. So basically it depends on the information you have. And then any legal and regulation that you think is relevant, that this system should be obeyed. So if this system, for example, is sold in Europe, then there's certain law and regulation like GDPR, for example, for data. If a system is sold in Korea, so what is the equivalent of, for example, a GDPR and something like that? And anything you think is relevant. This is just to understand as much as you can the usage of this system. And then it comes the interesting part, because then by listening to lectures and reading papers, your goal is to try to understand if there are issues. We call it issues. Issues could be of three kinds. Could be ethical issues. We call it ethical issues and tension. It could be technical issue and could be a legal issue. Now, let's start with the ethical issues. We use the term tension exactly in the first paper that you're going to read. So this is why you're reading this paper as first, because then when you see that, you have the complete explanation. So a tension is always when you have two values and either one need to be decided. So there's a tension because you can't have them both, so you need to make a decision. And this is not an abstract concept, it's specifically on the use of technology. So we're not talking about philosophical tension, but if I use a particular technology, what do I have? And since, I'm sure that most of you do not have, as all of us, because we didn't learn in engineering school, ethical background, we give you example of ethical tension in the catalog taken from here. So here you have the entire explanation for each of them. But just to give you an idea, you have a catalog that is like this one here. And then, for example, you can say, well, my system is working very well for specific class of people. It's better than a medical doctor. But the same set is not working very well for certain class of other people, maybe a minority. For example, is a skin detector. So it's detecting skin cancer on the skin. But it doesn't seem to work very well if the skin of the person is dark. It works very well for everybody else, so it's very accurate, but it's not fair because it's not doing the same job for everybody. So now there is a so-called tension between, do I want a system that is really working great for this kind of people, or do I want a system that is fair? But then I have a problem because this system, it cannot be both. You see, this is something that it's just already to be aware. Or the second one, accuracy and explainability. For example, you can have a system that seems to work extremely well, and it does its job extremely well, when people ask why you have a prediction like this, they cannot give an explanation because, for example, it's a deep learning algorithm and you cannot really see how this was the result. So if somebody was an explanation, then there's a tension because maybe by forcing explanation, you have to compromise accuracy. So you see this tension. Another one is privacy versus transparency. Privacy, because sometimes, and most of the cases, when you take, for example, if you take commercial product rather than research prototypes, most of the information will be private. So the question is, if you have privacy, it could be privacy of the technology, it could be privacy of the data. And if you want to have a transparent process where you would like to know how the technology is done, the data has been used, you might have a problem. And this could even be forced by law, for example, data protection, so you can't have transparency of the data. And then you see there are some other that are not obvious. And if you read this paper, there's a complete explanation for each of those. And if you find something that is not here, you can write your own tension. And once you have that as a help, again, taken from this paper, we are classifying ethical tension in 3 categories. And you'll see when you start watching the pre-recorded video lecture on ethics, you understand what is a dilemma. A dilemma is, a true ethical dilemma is a conflict between 2 or more duties, obligation, in our case, values, where you cannot solve this problem. A typical example is when you talk about ethics in the abstract level, you have a trolley, which is like a car, if you want, that has to make a decision. If I go left, I kill 2 people, 2 adults. If I go right, I kill 1 child. And that's the only 2 alternatives you have. None of them is good. And then you have a dilemma because you are forced to see this as a situation that can damage either or. So what is the best way? In any way, you're going to harm somebody. There was a very good example of somebody that depicted a screenplay where somebody in the plane, some terrorists hijacked a plane, and they wanted to crash the plane in a stadium with 100,000 people. And the dilemma was, shall I bomb the plane with 150 people on board and save 300,000 on the stadium, or shall I wait until they go and crash on the stadium? And it's a dilemma with no solution except that somebody have to make a decision. And this is a true dilemma. All the others are not dilemma because you have a solution. So you can find a solution. So that would be interesting to see if you can identify what is really an issue that have no solution but can be presented, or something that has a solution, only you don't see. So when you write your midterm report, there are some remarks that I would like to make. Never ever copy and paste text from the internet and other sources without certain rules, because it's very easy to take something from the internet and you can cut and paste it, and you have, especially if you have to write it in English, there's also a complication. But please, when you do that, you have 2 options. You can describe what the source, you have to always to quote the source. So you can describe with your terminology what the source is saying, using your words and quoting the source. For example, as indicated in, and this is a source, Roig and Fetter 2020, that's a reference to a paper, the moon is flat. Okay, so obviously one can argue what is talking about here, the moon is flat. And then at the end of the paper, you want to have a reference, which is like this one here, Roig and Vetter, 2020, Why the Moon is Flat. Roig Gemma, which is a colleague of us, Dennis Vetter, who is our TA, Journal Dreams, issue number 1, November 2020. Please look at this Journal of Dreams. Or you can quote the same source and basically in bracket here, write exactly what they said. So you can't cut and paste, you always have to say, for example, Roig and Vetter 2020 has made a case that, quote, the moon is completely flat and not round, end of the quote. And this is a reference, same reference as before. Please make sure to read the source when you use them to make sure you understand the context. In the example above, if you quote that the moon is flat without understanding that it was a dream and not a scientific evidence, you're using the quote in the wrong way. So ultimately, don't simply cut and paste. Try to understand what is your source saying and if it makes sense to your evidence you do. This is very important in general. It has nothing to do with ethics, but I think it's a very important practice and is avoiding plagiarism and is a key for writing in scientific way. So that was, the admin part. Just for you to understand, all this trustworthy AI was developed in Europe with a report set by a set of experts set by the European Commission that published in April 2019 a so-called framework for trustworthy AI. And this actually report, which is the second paper that you are reading this week, so this is really telling you, and I'll explain you between this lesson and the next one what it is. This framework also has, in third chapter, an assessment list. That's why the web tool is interesting. And that's why there is a website. It is actually a beta. It is a beta website that contains the list for the assessment and the tool that helps you to do something. So this is the link. You have to register. So please maybe do already now so that you can do the following. So you register here. There's some procedure to follow. And then the tool has, and you don't have to use it immediately because you don't know anything at the moment, but in the course of your work, you'll see that this is going to be used for the final report. But if you start using it in a couple of weeks now, you can get a feeling. It gives you a guidance in glossary and reference to the guidelines. And then the tool, if you enter some input, provide you some output, which is a visualization. It's like a self-assessment of the level of so-called adherence of the requirements for trustworthy AI that I'll show you today and the next lecture, and some recommendation. Now, this recommendation, you'll see, are general, and you need to analyze if they're appropriate for your case. But this is part of the final report, so I'm not going to spend too much time now because for the moment you don't need to use the tool. But just in case, you have to create an account, and this is the account. And once you are registered and you didn't find any problem, you can leave it there for a second. You don't have to use it, but at least you're registered, so you know that you have it. You'll use it later on. And the tool will guide you through certain questions that are colored with different colors. And with these different colors, you will have background questions for describing the system, blue question that will contribute for the system to give a recommendation, and red question that allows you to do a self-assessment. This could be a help for you when you do the final report. So for the moment, just have it as an information. the tool is actually in the final report. It is also optional if you want to look at fundamental rights. At least this is what the European Commission is suggesting. Now, not necessarily is something that you have to do for this assignment, but let me explain you what is an assessment for fundamental rights, at least in the way the EU sees it, because then you can decide if this is relevant for your case or not. So, first of all, fundamental rights encompass rights such as human dignity, non-discrimination, which would be a very important part of our assessment anyway, as well as rights in relation to data protection. Again, this would be part of our assessment, and privacy. So you see, under this very general abstract term, you already have a couple of things that you will find then very specific. So things that are, basically, at least the EU is suggesting is when you want to do an assessment of an AI system, even before doing that, why don't you do a so-called fundamental rights assessment? Of course, in Europe, it's actually based on Charter of European Convention on Human Rights and protocol. I'm sure that in Korea, there will be something very similar. I'm not a lawyer myself, so you see, I will need to leave to colleagues. And here you have some information. But just to have a feeling, on the question that you can ask, if you want to do a fundamental rights assessment, as I said, this is optional, is, for example, does the AI system potentially negatively discriminate against people on the basis of any of the following grounds? And then you see all of that. Very interesting is, for example, when you start having minority, so how you define minority. And so you can start, is the tool, for example, working both for female and male, or it seems to be working better for male and less for female? Or ethnicity is very important. Is the tool or the product working equally well for everybody, or it seems to work only well for Caucasian people, but for Asian people, it doesn't seem to work well, or for African American or Latino? These are very important parts. When it gets to things like this, then it gets into an area that is very difficult to assess. So you see, in some of the assessments, some elements are actually already provided, in other difficult. And then this is another important thing in a fundamental rights assessment in general. If the system potentially negatively discriminate against some people. Well, the question is, how you define discrimination? Well, depends on, for example, you could have a bias, and you will see, we'll talk about bias in the course. So if, for example, the system has been trained with only data from a certain category of people, it might end up discriminating, because then the system is actually taking an input that is biased, and the output is not necessarily fair. You see, discrimination and fairness are very similar. And then if that's the case, when something goes wrong, is there any way that they can modify? So suppose that they figure it out, they are doing some harm. Can they modify? Can they rectify? They can undo something or not? Or there's nothing you can do? For example, if it's a medical device and this is a wrong output, you can still have a doctor that say, okay, I think there's a wrong output. If it's a self-driving car that goes wrong, you might not have this opportunity. Something about child protection. Very unlikely that you find systems that are like that, but if you think of the supply chain, so this could even become a fundamental rights assessment of the supply chain. Anyway, that's just for you to give an idea. And then, of course, in Europe, there's a law on data protection. So do we comply with the data protection law? I'm not an expert in Korea, so to what extent you have something similar. But if somebody in Korea wants to sell something in Europe, then you are under this law. The other way around, I'm not sure. So I will leave my colleague to explain you what are the legal implications, because that's important. You know, it depends on also where you want to use that particular product. And again, if this is the end of the fundamental rights assessment, if the system is actually used for not having freedom of expression, then you are harming the individual rights. And of course, this gets into an area where democracy is a key thing. So, and let me give you in the next half an hour the foundation, and then next Monday we'll continue. So, since I'm a European and I've been working on this assessment process within Europe, I'm bringing you the European perspective, which, bear with me, is a European perspective. So we might have similarities and we might have differences. It would be extremely interesting also to identify if working with a European view in a context like Korea makes sense or not. So I think that would be very interesting also, this experiment, because this is the first time that I'm actually using this outside Europe. I've been doing this course in Germany, but that's the first time I'm bringing it outside Europe. And I think it's very important because AI is all over the place. And so this is basically what we are based is the work of the EU, the so-called high-level expert group. And they have defined requirements. This is not a law, they're just recommendation. And there are requirements for something called trustworthy. They didn't call it ethical AI, very interesting. They call it trust. And trust is something that is funny because I read time ago when I was doing some research, a book written by a scholar that was saying, right, I wrote an entire book on the concept of trust in Korea. So if I found the book reference, I certainly give you, because trust, trust in society, trust in how you trust, what is trust? We'll have a lesson on exactly the abstract definition of how you define trust. Do you trust me? Do I trust you? Do you trust the source? And that's important. And here we're talking about trusting artificial intelligence. So they try to give some definition, and the definition are 3 pillars. It should be lawful, so it should respect all applicable laws and regulations. And here we come that each country has different law. That's why I'm very grateful that I have an expert in the local law, because it will, and we have some lectures on law in the pre-recorded, but they are from the European perspective. So it will be extremely interesting to compare differences and similarity, because the law normally is catching up with technology. So new technology comes, the law is not prepared, there is a gap in the law, you use some technology, you figure it out that maybe there is a problem, and then you do another law. So ethics helps you, it's soft, helps you to define hard law. And that's very interesting because ethics and law are different, but obviously they are related. And the second will be if they are ethical, so we will see what kind of principle and value they base, and technically robust. Very important. See, there's everything for everybody. But they're not so independent. So that seems like easy. But most of the time, a technical issue has an ethical implication, or might even have a legal implication. An ethical implication might have a technical implication or a legal one. So they are not really separated, but that's for you to have. And this is a source. It's the second paper you're reading. Now, it's not going to be me explaining you what ethics, because I have better people in our course in the pre-recorded. So, for example, in one of the lessons that you're going to watch, the second one, this one here, Dr. Manuel Goffi will give you a gentle introduction to what is ethics. It is a branch of philosophy. And basically is in an abstract way, mankind for centuries have been trying to understand what is a good life, good in respect to what is a bad life, which also could be transforming what is right and what is wrong. And there are several branches, theoretical branches, and is an attempt also to assess our action. We are not doing a course on ethics here. We are doing apply ethics. We apply ethics to a particular use of a technology. So that's a branch of philosophy, because otherwise we're going to start describing ethics. If somebody of you in the audience has a background in philosophy, very welcome, because then you can complement our vision. But we're not talking about ethics in general. Here you can see this framework is basically using ethical principle rooted in fundamental rights. That's why I show you before this assessment of fundamental rights, which is general, because they're trying to operationalize the whole thing. So the four ethical principles, and I'm going to explain each of them, are the following: respect for human autonomy, prevention of harm, fairness, explicability. Now, the first three, 1, 2, 3, you find them in medicine, you find it in bioethics. So if some of you has a background in medicine or has been trained in that area, you say, okay, I already see them. If some of you are coming from engineering or data science, they've never seen it, so I'll explain you each of them. But this one here, even the one in medicine, they've never seen it, because this word, explicability, it was invented. So this is a new ethical principle. In fact, explicability, you might wonder, what is explicability? It's not explainability, it's not, so it's on purpose a new word. And there are so-called tension between this principle. Tension, remember, if I have this, I don't have this, I can have them both. So you can have them all. And this is, again, the source is the second paper you're reading this week. So you see, I'm trying to match what you are reading. So at least for the first lesson, I'll go through this principle, and for the next lesson, I continue with the requirements. So the principle of respect of human autonomy, as I said, you have it better written here, but basically, at least this is actually, again, the European perspective, but human autonomy is the fundamental rights upon which the European Union is founded. So it would be interesting, if you want, to do a little research and see what are the fundamental rights upon which the Korean democratic system is founded, because then you can see and maybe compare the similarity and the differences. I think it's very important, because this is actually the foundation of this work. And this is directed towards ensuring respect for the freedom and autonomy of human beings. Obviously, and it's not a surprise, is typically what we expect in a democracy. So, of course, you know, if a country does not respect that, so you're not in that area. So you see, this is already a very important assumption that we do, that this framework assumes certain fundamental rights in theory. Well, then in practice, this is happening is a second story, but at least, you know, in the Constitution, you should have that. Then in practice, you can say, okay, humans interacting with us, this is the general stuff. Now, how to go from a general to specific on AI? Well, basically you have human people, so us, interacting with AI system. An AI system is designed, trained, and tested by a human being. So it's not that it comes on its own. And so it's interesting, because what they would like to do in this principle is a human interacting with AI system, the human, must be able to keep full and effective self-determination over themselves and be able to partake, so be part in the democratic process. Now, as you can see, with this principle, you will not be able to do the assessment. So that's why it's important to understand the ethical principles are general. It will be when we do requirements that you will be able to do the assessment. Because think about it, what does it mean keep full and effective self-determination? If you are on a self-driving car, you don't keep full and effective self-determination if you let the car drive it. If you are in medicine and the tool is helping a doctor, the question is, how is the doctor relating to this tool? Does he make the decision, or does he consult the AI system, or does he think that the AI system is better, so he leaves it, or he never trusts the AI system? So that's very important when you have interaction between human and AI. There's a lot of interaction. And important, if you are in this space, is this in a democratic process? So that's the respect of human autonomy. It goes on, so it continues, and the attempt to define this into a context of AI is the AI system should not unjustifiably subordinate, coerce, deceive, manipulate, condition, or hurt humans. Basically, it shouldn't be used for doing harm, although there's no written harm here, but it's obviously connected. So if you're using an AI system in military, then you have immediately a lot of dilemmas there. We're not going to cover military on purpose because that's neither an area I understand nor I have anything to say about it. In healthcare, I think is more important because human autonomy means also give permission of having an AI doing something. And the hope is that the AI should be designed to so-called augment. Augment in English means that it's complementary. So there's a medical doctor, and the AI is not replacing the medical doctor, but is working together with, and so complement and empower. So basically, give better diagnosis or something like that. And to what extent there are opportunity for the human person to still make a choice. And this basically means the so-called concept of securing human oversight. Now, human oversight, and sometimes you might think, what is human oversight? Oversight means that the human is able to have a way, a word of saying what to do if there is an AI system in the process of making a decision. Of course, if you are a self-driving car where the car is driving completely on its own, this might actually be that you don't have any human oversight. So this is very important to understand. What is the role of the AI? Is replacing people, is complementing people, is augmenting the capabilities. Very important in the aim. That was the first principle. The second principle, you will see in the recorded of lecture that this will be also discussed. But I thought that for the beginning, it's important to have a gentle initial introduction. The principle of prevention of harm. I think intuitively everybody understands that. You don't have to be a philosopher to understand. You don't want to do harm. But what is harm? Of course, if I cut my finger, I feel it. But I can have a harm done by not physical harm. It could be that I'm doing something that is producing harm to the dignity of the person, is producing harm to the soul of the person, is actually, so harm is connected to well-being, is connected to, not only the physical integrity, but also the mental integrity, the dignity. So, and there's a lot of them. So there's, basically the idea of this principle that you don't want a system that is causing harm or even doing more harm to human beings. And harm is very general. So you see, that's why with this principle, you won't be able to say, okay, I have the solution to define, to measure harm. But at least you should have this principle in mind, because then you understand that this is connected to possible risk. Now, the principle of prevention of harm define a concept called vulnerable person. Now, a vulnerable person, I mean, if I would have a lesson in an interactive style in a classroom, I would start asking you, I can do it now, maybe that's an experiment. Anybody has any suggestion, what is a vulnerable person? Can you give me one example? You can put it in the chat or you can raise your hand. What could be a vulnerable person in your opinion? You don't have to think of anything extraordinary, but think of maybe a family. What could be a vulnerable person in a family?
I think maybe in a social context, a vulnerable person, if a parent does something illegal and then they're taken to prison, a vulnerable person, indirect vulnerable person would be the kids who would have to grow up without parents because the parents went to jail. Maybe this is an example.
Thank you. So basically your colleague said, if the parents go to jail, the kids stay at home. And I see in the chat that I don't dare to pronounce it, but I see there's children or disabled person. So all of these questions, also these answers are correct, or probably a person belonging to a minority. A vulnerable person could be maybe someone who depends on family members a certain way. So let's analyze all of those. We start with you. I forgot who's your name, because I don't see on the gentleman that said about parents
Karim.
going to jail. So,
Karim, Professor.
Karim, yeah. The vulnerable person are people like kids, children. So everybody would say children is obvious, even if the parents don't go to jail. Because a kid, like, when you are 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, is dependent on some people. So that's very important. A vulnerable person is somebody that we need to receive greater attention. Now, it could be a kid. Basically, what you said when somebody have either parents in jail, or if you unfortunately lose your parents and you don't have a father dies, a mother dies, or both of them dies, there's a vulnerable person. Disabled people, for sure. Because of course, or minority also. But that's a slightly different definition because, where a children, you have a clear definition that a kid of 6 months is dependent and vulnerable. When you start having the concept of disabled, you have a law that says, what is the level of disability that you have? Because there's certain level. And then depending on the level of disability, you are more or less dependent on. You see, there's something legal. When actually Mikhail Malina-Noor Rose, it's an interesting long name, probably a person belonging to a minority. A vulnerable person could be maybe someone who depends on family member in a certain way. There are different concepts here. Belonging to a minority, who is defining what is a minority? And why this minority has to be protected? So this is highly political and social. So it has to be defined in the context. It could be that the minority is an ethnic minority, a religious minority, all kinds of other things. And then Jaewon Chang said, please change. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, last name and first name. Yes, there was only a comment. And then somebody said, something like that. Elderly person as well. Of course, elderly person as well, for sure. But look, elderly person, what does, first of all, let's define elderly person. What is an elderly person? Now, you have a law that says when you are 18, you can vote, so you become adult. But in certain cultural ritual in different places, becoming adult, maybe you become adult at 12. Of course, not in Europe, but there's a ritual that says now you are an adult. Who is an elderly person? Now, it's funny, I think in Korea, as in Europe, we have a concept of being retired, right? With 65, you retire, at least I think it. And that's been changing this concept, so there's not fixed, you don't have it fixed. So in some places you can work. So elderly, for example, you could say, well, I go to a museum and I get a discount. Or elderly could mean that you are old and more fragile. Well, but if you're feeling good, then you're not necessarily a vulnerable person. You can see from the virus now that obviously, at least in Europe, they have done a ranking of vaccine. So I don't know how it's in Korea, but in Europe, well, not in Europe, in fact, in Germany, because Europe has been fragmented. In Germany, they started with the first category, people above 80. Because these are people in elderly house, more vulnerable, so for the virus. And then they have a second category between 70, in the area of 70, plus people like in the police or the hospital, then people over 60, so you decrease, and all the rest. So basically, vulnerable people are defined so that you can take more attention, and you can see now in the pandemic. And this is the same here. And then I see a comment from G Show or something like that, ethical minority in terms of face recognition algorithm. So the two parts here, ethical minority is a definition that somebody has to give, and it should be accepted somehow in some way. If it's not accepted, then you have a problem of this. And then the second comment in terms of face recognition is already the technology. So this system, and that's actually the interesting part, should receive attention. So basically, we should make sure that when you develop an AI system, you don't harm people that are more in need. So that was actually, I like this. So if you like that in an interactive way, I'm very happy to do that. We can do it in this way. So I think we can do it in the chat, or you can raise a hand and I will ask my co-host, if you see somebody raising their hand, then you can give them permission to speak. How about that? Then we have a dialogue. I think it's important that we are turning this into at least a live lesson, because the one that you are watching pre-recorded, you'll see there's certain question at the end, but at least the one that are live, I think is important that we spend time to discuss it, because this is really all about this course. Mm-hmm. So thank you. That was actually quite nice. I like that. So if you like it, I'll ask once in a while for interaction, which is good. And then, as you can see here, you're still on the principle of harm. Particular attention must also be paid to situations where AI system can cause or exacerbate adverse impacts due to asymmetries of power or information. So you wonder, what is he talking about here? Well, if somebody of you is coming from a background in economy, then you know exactly what he's talking about here. So an asymmetry of power means that somebody has a lot and somebody has little. So you can have an asymmetry because in the market, for example, the supplier of masks is only one big company and nobody else has it. So of course he has the power and he can decide the price, he can decide to whom to give it. So if you have a system that is an AI system that is reinforcing this asymmetry of power, you are not doing something good to some people. That's why there's a harm. Information is the same. Now it's a big thing. You know, you have a big tech company, mostly in the States, but also in China, they are gathering a lot of information and are aggregating a lot of information. There's a symmetry of power. Or they gather so much information that they decide what this information is. So you see, there are harm can be not only you're doing the harm because the patient is there's a harm on the prediction, but it could be that, for example, the system is doing harm by creating and supporting something that maybe is already there. So let me conclude today by telling you what I will be doing next week, because I don't think we have, I don't want to start something because I see that there's a couple of minutes before I finish. So what we're gonna do next week, Monday, I'm going to go through the principle of fairness. So, and you see that, and I will do a description of that. I will go to this new ethical principle of explicability. Why is it new and why it is useful for? And I will explain something that has to do with black box in AI so that you understand that. And I will tell you something about tension and trade-off so that you get an idea. And very important, here is the thing. That's why I'm telling you now, because if you're reading the paper, you will see that in the framework for trustworthy AI, you go from the ethical principles that are very difficult to assess in so-called requirements. And there are several requirements that are this one here: human agency and oversight, technical robustness and safety, privacy and data governance, transparency, diversity, non-discrimination and fairness, societal environmental well-being, accountability. And I will go one by one so that when you start reading the paper, maybe if you read it before, and I'm doing the lecture next week, we can even have an interaction, because this is the framework that we are going to use for the assessment. So these 7 principles that are coming from all this discussion, human rights and ethical principles, are our base for the next 16 weeks. So I would say I stop here. I would say we have a time for maybe a couple of questions, because then if you have comments or other thing, otherwise, basically, I think what I would like to do is to agree with the TA on how to do this team and the Google Docs. And then I'll if you have the recording of the video, if you can upload it, then they also have it. And I put the copy of the slides already on the website, and I can put the link to the video as well. So I would say we have a couple of minutes for one question, for example, if there's any. They don't have to have a question. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any, was there any reason to choose the subject of the final paper of on the healthcare AI?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So the question your colleague is that, why did you choose healthcare and not, for example, finance or public government? Very good question. The reason why we choose in healthcare, because this is the, we did 4 cases ourselves. So this process, we learn it by doing practical work in healthcare. So we learn in healthcare. So now we know something in healthcare. And I'm not able to explain you something outside healthcare because we didn't do any real case ourselves. There's a big team that works on that. So yes, this could be done in other domains, but I think if for the moment we stay in healthcare because that's what we have learned and we can then teach. In the future, if we're going to do for something in other area, then I think we can do maybe a course in legal or information or finance, but for the moment is healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think this is all the time we have for today. So maybe I'll stop the sharing so that we can see everybody.